Thanks for joining us again for Table Talk. I'm your host, Dan Deatherage. My co-host down at the end of the table is Down East Dave Hudson. Remember Dave? Dave will ask all the pertinent and smart questions today. And with us today in the middle is Don Brown, candidate for U.S. Senator here in North Carolina to represent the entire state in Washington, D.C. And Don, glad to have you here. You're really elevating our clientele here today.
No, man, it's the other way around. I'm getting elevated, you know. You guys over here.
Well, we got a heavy lift, and we're going to elevate
the intelligence guy over here. I got one of the most prominent political powers in Beaufort County with me, you know. So
yeah, in my own mind, maybe.
Hey, we're at least it exists somewhere, huh?
Exactly, Don. God
Right.
bless you. That's funny. But tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I grew up in Plymouth, right down the road, you know, which is Washington County, right next to Beaufort County, and did a lot of fishing, you know, the Roanoke River, the Albemarle Sound, Pamlico Sound. Went fishing with my granddaddy, and
Did you net fish for herring?
I sure did. Oh yeah, absolutely. With the basket, they come up the sloughs, and I swear I never realized what the government had done. They stopped our ability to cook herring, to catch them. But there was an Easter Monday in Janesville, North Carolina. They'd run the seine. They call it across the Roanoke River. I don't know if you remember any of that or not, but they run that net across the river, and millions of them would come in. And there were two restaurants down there on the river's edge. There was River's Edge Restaurant, which I think might still be there, and the Cypress Grill. And man,
I've eaten at Cypress Grill.
Yeah, they cooked those herrings up, man. And then my granddad and I, we'd catch them, and then we'd salt them, and we'd keep them salted all year long, and then cook them for breakfast. So the answer to your question is absolutely yes. I've caught them net and everything else you can think of.
Jamesville is famous for that.
It is. Oh, yeah. God's country, baby.
Tell me a little bit about your military career.
Was a JAG officer in the U.S. Navy, 16 years altogether, 5 active, 11 in the reserves. My last duty station was at the Pentagon, which was quite an experience. And, you know, one of the things we talked about, I'm a writer, and we discussed that. One of the things that got me started is that my office at the Pentagon was destroyed on 9/11. Now, I had left the Pentagon. I've been out for a few years after that, but it makes you think. And so sat down and started writing, and I have a book released on radical Islamic infiltration inside the military, and it was a novel on that. So, but it was an interesting experience. I love the Navy. One of my crossroad questions looking back, should have I stayed? I know I'd probably made captain. They had me on the fast track, or should I have gotten out? And you know, I'm a conservative because of the great Jesse Helms.
Oh, yeah, he was a great man.
There's a story behind that. But Jesse Helms had a buddy named Tom Ellis.
I remember Tom Ellis.
And Tom Ellis had founded the Congressional Club, and it was Jesse Helms' political mentor. And Jesse Helms had me up to a weekend at Meredith College when I was a senior in high school. Jesse Helms, Jack Kemp, Gary Bomar, and Paul, I'm trying to think of the fourth one. Phil Crane was the fourth one. And they basically taught us younger folks at the time about conservative principles. I became a conservative. And but Ellis was kind of like the political genius behind the Helms machine for a long time. And I always said if I had a chance to go to work for his law firm, that might pull me out of the Navy. One thing led to another. I had a chance to go to work for Maupin, Taylor, and Ellis in their Fort Mill, South Carolina office, which is a suburb of Charlotte. And so that's what brought me out of the Navy and brought us back to the Carolinas.
And you pretty much live close to Charlotte right now.
Live in Union County, but my heart, of course, is in Eastern North Carolina. But I got a couple of daughters there and a couple of grandkids there. But they're nice folks up there. Charlotte has turned too blue for my taste, but there's still some great people there. It's like Raleigh; you just got to look for them to find them.
Yes. And I'm from Raleigh myself originally, and lived down here for many, many years, but I don't recognize it anymore. I really don't. So from Jesse Helms and that group, Tom Ellis, you learned a lot about the Constitution and what it means to govern from a constitutional perspective,
right,
with our nation being what a lot of us regard as a constitutional republic.
Right.
Would you like to reflect on that a little bit, especially now that you're looking to seek the Republican nomination for United States Senator?
Well, I have a passion for the Constitution. Not only do a lot of people call us a constitutional republic, but Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution itself says that this Constitution shall give the states a Republican form of government. And I lecture on the Constitution. I love it. And
we're not a democracy?
Well, you know, here's the deal. You know this already, but James Madison, the guy that wrote, the principal author of the Constitution, said democracy is the most vile. Democracy is the most vile form of government. That means it's pretty nasty. John Adams, our second president, said all democracies commit suicide. And the best one to me was Benjamin Franklin, who said that democracy is like two wolves and a lamb meeting at high noon and voting on what they're going to have for lunch. So that's the best one. But the founders hated democracy. Yeah. And there was never a question as to what type of government we have been, really up until around 1913, when Woodrow Wilson started the world must be made safe for democracy BS. And when we passed the 16th Amendment, which is the income tax amendment, in my opinion, the biggest constitutional mistake we've made. And that year they passed the first Income Tax Act and also passed the Federal Reserve Act. There were a lot of damage done in 1913, but we are a constitutional republic. And, Reagan said famously and he was quoting Jefferson, which basically folks don't understand what the Constitution means. But Jefferson said the government that governs least is the government that governs best.
Yes.
And so our federal Constitution is designed to create a federal government that is limited.
Yes.
With most of its powers at Article 1, Section 8 for the Congress. The 10th Amendment specifically indicates that everything not specifically put in the Constitution goes back to the states. Mm-hmm. For example, education. There's no federal constitutional role for education, period. Now, the North Carolina Constitution does provide that a public education will be provided by the state in the General Assembly. And by the way, Article 9 of the North Carolina Constitution starts on the education part that religion, morality, and knowledge shall be the basis for good government and education. And the North Carolina Constitution defines only one religion in it, and that is the Christian religion, just so you'll know. But that's an example of how states have all powers that are not specifically put in the federal constitutions come to the states and local governances. Yes. You're a distinguished commissioner, and that's part of what you're overseeing.
Thank God for the 10th Amendment.
Yes, exactly. Well, if we applied it, yeah. If we applied it, that's the thing.
So. Exactly. And, I've heard many times that all government is local, all governing is local. Well, but it needs to be that way because we're closest to the people.
Let me tell you something. I was coming through Plymouth, my hometown, and Plymouth's got a nice little waterfront. It's not as expansive as Washington's, but they got a couple little places down the river. And I stopped in there. My sister still lives there, and went to there's a Riverside cafe in there. Went in there and ordered a salad and some coffee, and I overheard a couple of folks talking. And one fellow was running for town council, and he is a conservative guy, from what I can tell, pro-business to conservative type guy. And I went over and said hello to him. He found out I was running for Senate. He says, "Oh, you're running for something important." I said, "Nope. What you're doing is more important than what I'm running for, because you're closer to the people." And it is true that all government is local, and that's the way it should be. Stan, what the folks in Beaufort County need and want, and you see them every day. And the farther away you get from the local county, local town, whether it's Raleigh or Washington, the representatives there, those are important positions, don't get me wrong, but are detached from what the local needs are. And so and we as Republicans, unfortunately, don't seem to understand that like we should understand it. We just looked at these elections, odd year midterm elections in places like Raleigh and Charlotte and other places where the Democrats just, washed open. I talked to the chair of the Mecklenburg County Republican Party, Kyle Kirby, who told me that if 40% of registered Republicans had come in Mecklenburg County and voted, that county would have been red.
Yeah. So
our own Republicans don't fully understand the importance of local government.
We have a hard time getting Republicans in the polls on off-year congressional elections.
Right.
But they will come to the polls for the presidential elections.
Yeah, that's right. It's presidential elections. They come. By the way, I was just as an aside, I got my first hit piece from the News Observer last week.
Oh, congratulations.
And the dude tried to set me up, trying to say, hey, he's trying to set me up like I'm too conservative. He says, "Don't you agree North Carolina's a purple state?" I said, "Dude, let me ask you a question." His name is, what's the guy's name? The hit piece writer for the News Observer, the editorial guy.
I wish I could help you with that, but I don't read nurses.
No, it's good. It's good when the toilet paper's out. But on that side, see, he's trying to trap me into saying I'm too conservative.
Yes.
So let me ask you a question: how many times since 1968, with Nixon versus Humphrey, has North Carolina gone? Has North Carolina voted for the Democrat presidential nominee? Well, he got the answer. It was only two.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So we are not as purple as they want
No.
us to think we are.
We have a hard time electing a Republican governor, although the legislature is decidedly Republican.
Right. And it's an odd thing, the three most important Council of State positions, in my opinion. Well, first of all, the Attorney General and the Secretary of State are the ones who are controlling the levers of power on a daily basis. The Attorney General can decide who they want to prosecute, what laws they want to enforce, and the Secretary of State, of course, oversees corporate structures, but also elections. Then you got the governor over here who did not have veto power up until about 30, 40 years ago. You know that Jim Hunt, during the Hunt administration, they gave him veto power. But for whatever reason, those three offices they have controlled. There have been three Republican governors in my lifetime. There was Holshouser, Jim Martin, and Pat McCrory, but 0 attorneys general, 0 secretaries of state. But other than that, Republicans pretty much have controlled North Carolina, and the Republican registration is increasing. But you got to get them out. You got to get them out, and it doesn't do any good to eclipse the Democrats in registration if you don't get your people out, and especially in local elections.
Well, you've written books. You've written 16 books, I believe, most of them about military, and one was made in a production, I believe.
Right.
And so obviously you believe in telling your tale, telling your story, and educating people. Now, one of the problems I think we have in North Carolina and most everywhere else is we don't educate our people to know the difference between right and wrong, what's proper, and might doesn't always make right.
Solomon said, without a vision, the people perish.
Yes.
Our vision has been a constitutional republic. But it's interesting. As I mentioned, I lecture on the Constitution from time to time and love it. I've passed 2 bar exams by the grace of God, North and South Carolina. And in law school, and I went to Campbell, which is a conservative, at least at the time, it was a conservative Baptist school. I think still it's more conservative than the other schools around the state, but back then it was really conservative. And they teach a course in law school called constitutional law, and then they make you take constitutional law for the bar exam. Okay? I can tell you that not once did I ever read the Constitution when I took constitutional law. This is the run of the mill. So what happens in law school is you go in there and you take constitutional law, they give you a big book. It's called a horn book. You open the book. Yeah. And you start reading cases that the Supreme Court said about the Constitution.
Just interpretation of the Constitution.
Yeah. The first landmark case is called Marbury versus Madison. You probably heard about it.
Yes, I have.
You start reading there and reading the next one. Then by the end, you're supposed to figure out what the Constitution says. Well, that's like going to seminary and reading sermons, some good ones. Here's one from Billy Graham. Here's one from, whoever else, and some good ones and bad ones. And then at the end, you're supposed to figure out what the Bible says just from reading sermons. And there's a constitutional ignorance, and it's very, very dangerous. I've asked this question a lot of times. I won't put you on the spot. You would nail it anyway. But there's an icebreaker when I'm lecturing on the Constitution. I'll say, what are the 5 fundamental rights of the First Amendment? Fundamental or unalienable being the same thing. Mm-hmm. And I've thrown that question to lawyer buddies. And I've only had a handful that could ever get that right.
It's only about 35 words, right?
That's right. And they're fundamental rights. And so I have one, what are the rights? The right to freedom of religion is first, and the press and
assembly.
And assembly, right to petition the government for redress of grievances.
Absolutely.
And freedom of speech. Those are the 5. But, I have one lawyer say, "Mr. freedom of religion, freedom of press, right to bear arms." So I have one lawyer.
He missed one early.
But look, here's the thing about it. That ought to be as axiomatic as even
exactly.
It should be just like that. Boom, 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 boom. And we ought to be teaching that everywhere. And we should be teaching it from K to 12 in the public schools. And I've talked to members of the General Assembly about this. And some of them have told me that that there have been bills to at least require a constitutional mastery prior to graduation that have been bottled up on the Senate leader's desk. I don't know exactly what all is going on, but I can tell you it ought to be taught. The Constitution and the Federalist Papers should be taught K to 12 every year.
I agree with you.
And if
they can break it down for the kids.
Yes, of course they can. And just like the 5 fundamental rights. That's just that should be as axiomatic as Mary had a little lamb. And everybody should be able to say speech, religion, the press, petition, right
to gather.
Assembly. It ought to be boom, 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 boom. But you can't get lawyers to answer that question. And if lawyers, and I'm going to tell you, Stan, lawyers do not know the Constitution.
I've recognized that over the years.
That's right. And they'll just make anything up.
And sometimes they don't know the general statutes in North Carolina, too, I found.
Yeah, right.
But we talked about the First Amendment, Second Amendment, and the 10th. We hit the 10th pretty hard.
Yeah.
we were talking earlier about the Article 2 abilities of the president. And one of the things we were talking about was what's going on in Venezuela right now.
Right.
We think, and we haven't heard Trump talk about it yet, but the President Trump, we think that he's got a big plan to not only take care of narco-terrorism, but to control Venezuela through the Monroe Doctrine. Would you like to speak to that?
Well,
and Dave, you jump in a little bit because I know you had a question you wanted to ask him about.
Sure. So looking at it and kind of the way that things have been evolving in geopolitical scene and how we see that we may be, withdrawing more from our involvement in Europe and the defense of Europe, but we're focusing in the pivot to Asia.
Sure.
But at the same time, we still see China. They're heavily investing in South America and elsewhere in the world, and even the Russians to a smaller extent, but really trying to move in and insert their dominance, whether it's control of sea lanes, whether it's commerce, whatever the case may be, here in our hemisphere, and whether or not what the president's doing is part of putting the Monroe Doctrine back into effect. You're not going to come in and interfere in our hemisphere, and if we have to make you rely on your own defense in your hemisphere, that should be right. They should be, they should have to maintain what they do first, but we need to focus on what we're doing here. And I think he's using whether it's tariffs, whether it's what we're seeing with Venezuela, potential military action, any of that, that's within his powers to do and part of a larger national strategy to some extent. And what you would think from your perspective.
Well, actually, I was interviewed by Real America's Voice by their Pentagon correspondent on this very question about a month ago. Matter of fact, we were over in Craven County, and she was shooting me. I have my portable studio. Are we reverting to the Monroe Doctrine? I believe that President Trump is moving in that direction. And with regard to Venezuela, first off, I had a number of interviews recently on the president's authority to protect Americans on the high seas. And of course, what's happened with this whole thing with Hegseth is this. You had these 6 senators, including Mark Kelly, come up with a stupid video basically encouraging American service members to disobey lawful orders.
As a former JAG officer, you think they were not right to tell every 1.4 million service members to not follow Trump's rules and laws, what he needs?
You've got to look at the context. So context is everything.
Yes.
Well, what they said, they had about 6 of them, and one of them was saying he's dividing Americans against Americans. You don't have to disobey the order. They were doing this within the context of the strikes on these narco boats. Okay, it's not like we're going into the Army War College at Carlisle Barracks or the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, and having a generic discussion on the law of war. No, these were targeted at American sailors and Marines and soldiers in the Southern Theater. Okay, and so Mark Kelly is retired. He's a retired Navy captain, and the Uniform Code of Military Justice will allow retirees who have served at least 20 and are in what we call the DEER system to be called back up. And what Mark Kelly did, he violated the UCMJ on multiple counts. Number one, disrespect to the commander-in-chief, conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline, sedition. Sedition is under Article 94 to UCMJ, which is when you're trying to discourage civilian control over the military. But when you look back historically, going all the way back to Thomas Jefferson, from the beginning of the Republic, presidents protected Americans on the high seas with the Barbary pirates. When we sent the Navy and Marine Corps in 1803.
That's the first event for the Marine Corps, wasn't
it? That's where you get from to the shores of Tripoli. Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly right. Abraham Lincoln seized the RMS Trent. It was a British mail ship that had Confederate sympathizers on it. When you go into World War II, even before World War II, in 1941, a year before Pearl Harbor, FDR was ordering the Navy to sink German U-boats that were interfering with American shipping with these wolf packs. And so he gave that order unilaterally without congressional approval. So you see it over and over and over again. And these drugs coming in. Now listen, we've lost more Americans, Stan, in 1 year to fentanyl than 10 years to the Vietnam War.
Yes.
They are weapons of mass destruction. So I was asked the other day on Fox and one of their network, what about the second tap? Did he do wrong to have the second tap? Because remember, they're looking, when Hegseth threatened to call Mark Kelly up to be prosecuted, all of a sudden you get this second tap thing. You never heard of that before. After the senator from Michigan said, we don't have any specific illegal order. They make up the second tap thing. Well, here's what I told the interviewers, and I'll share this with you as well. If that boat is still in the water and it still has drugs on board, which are weapons of mass destruction designed to take our lives, by the way, either intentionally or inadvertently, then you blow it the hell out of the water, okay? And if some terrorist is hanging on to the side of the boat, that's just too freaking bad. They have to be hanging on because that's collateral damage to carry out the mission. So even if Pete had seen the terrorist out there and there were drugs on that boat and he gave the order, it's fair game because they're moving that stuff in. And I've been well over 70 counties in North Carolina. I've probably talked to a dozen sheriffs, including the local sheriff. I've asked this question: what's the fentanyl situation? Since Trump sealed the border, it's gone down, but they're trying to bring it in through the high seas now. Yeah. So that's what's happening.
Wow, that is very, very. You hit all the points right there.
Well, that's where we are, and they'll try anything, they'll say anything, and it's just about accumulation of power. Democrats,
Well, you're talking about sealing the border, and for 4 good years, the border was wide open, and we were lied to as a public, not only from the Biden administration but from their media. They lied and said it was not a problem. Fentanyl came in. It's costing us trillions of dollars at least every few years to process these people into our society. Sure. And now ICE is trying to get them out, and they've gotten about 2.5 million out. And they're working hard to right the ship, so to speak. At least that's my opinion. Do you feel that the Biden administration was right to do what they did, even if it would have been a great benefit to the Democratic Socialist Party? Or do you think that President Biden may have done some treasonous things?
I think you're closer to it with your second question. Now, first off, when you open the border like you do, and not only open the border, but they stopped enforcement at the border. That the message was sent into other parts of the country: come right on across, nobody's going to stop you. You're bringing in cartels. We were in Greensboro speaking to the Federation of Republican Women on the Saturday that the news broke about the Border Patrol coming to Charlotte. So we're to come this direction. We turned around and went back to Charlotte and did a video from First Ward. Okay. And the thing about it is with Charlotte, because Charlotte is at the intersection of 77 and 85, and there are two other major interstates, and is one of the busiest airports in the world. What Biden has done is he's created drug trafficking conglomerates and sex trafficking conglomerates. That has been the largest immediate thing that we've seen, but what we haven't seen is sleeper cells, because these Muslims have been coming across, these Sharia fools are coming across, they're setting up sleeper cells all over the country. And I've argued not only do we have had an illegal immigration problem, we've had a legal immigration problem. These Sharia types should never have been allowed to immigrate legally in the United States. And I'm going to fight against that in the United States Senate. I'm going to push to end Sharia immigration in the United States, because you've got terror cells sitting here latently all over the country. You don't know when they're going to go off or where. So what Biden has done is treasonous. And by the way, he brought in something like 70,000 Afghans, in this allies or thingamajig program. I'm trying to think of the acronym he used for it. And of course, it was one of those that killed this National Guardsman, this young lady from West Virginia up in D.C., and shot the other one. So I think
both of them headshots.
These have been treasonous actions for sure by that administration, and somebody ought to be made to pay for it, if you ask me about it.
It's done a lot of damage.
Oh, it has.
I don't think there's been this much damage done to our nation since World War II.
No, right, exactly, and it's designed by the executive branch of the federal government and by the deep state. You see, we're fighting English-speaking communists. Yeah. Our enemies are now among us, and they speak English. And we got to understand that the sooner we do, the better off we're going to be.
God bless you.
I was going to say that brings up an issue too with the lawfare we saw under the Biden administration, and now in an attempt, whether it's Department of Justice, whoever, to investigate what transpired and prosecute anybody who is found guilty through the evidence or whatever. But one of the items that we've heard as an issue now is trying to confirm judges to the bench and actually be able to set up to where they can even prosecute or have the courts available, because the blue slips being used by certain senators to prevent the nominees from being able to take the bench. And I don't know if you've got an opinion on that. But
actually, I wrote a book on lawfare. Okay. It was my most recent book was called Kangaroo Court, and the book
that's a good title.
The book was released in October, and it's a look at the Democrats' use of lawfare going back over 30 years. Really, we look at the Trump prosecutions, and in that book, I predicted correctly that if Trump prosecutions would unravel, every one of the prosecutions against President Trump was an assault on the Constitution. But last night, believe it or not, we go from the chief White House correspondent for NBC News to you guys, and you guys are my kind of guys. You know what I mean?
Thank you.
Thank you.
But
We try.
but we were with the chief White House correspondent, Peter Nichols, in Raleigh last night, and this conversation came up. He said, "Well, and I said the Democrats were assaulting the Constitution with these these political prosecutions." He said, "Well, isn't Trump doing the same thing?" He brings up Letitia James, and he brings up Comey, and I guess Bolton. I said, "No." He said, "Why is that?" It's because you've given me 3 isolated instances with Letitia James are looking at her for a legitimate potential crime, which is mortgage fraud. But what I'm saying to you is these Democrats have not just gone after political leaders, but they've gone after people like Mark and Patricia McCloskey. Remember that name?
Yes.
That's the couple in St. Louis just holding their gun.
Right.
Okay. There's another guy, and I said, "Hey, Peter, do you remember the name Douglas Mackey?" And the chief White House correspondent did not remember that name, Douglas Mackey. I said, "Well, look it up, because there are 2 S's at the end. Douglas Mackey. Mackey was a cartoonist, and get this now, 2016, he does these cartoons lampoonning Hillary Clinton voters is pretty stupid. I have to agree with that. 2016, because it's like, hey, you go vote here, go vote there, or whatever. It was clearly, that's an absolutely protected right under the First Amendment. You guys are now journalists, so you got multiple protections, freedom of speech and the press. So he does this. 2016, when Biden comes into the White House. In 2021, the Justice Department prosecutes Douglas Mackey for election interference. I mean, for exercising his First Amendment rights 5 years later. These are attacks on average Americans. And so the book looks at a lot of those as well, not just political prosecutions. They went after, the Democrats prosecuted Rick Perry, the former governor of Texas, when he was governor, for vetoing a bill which he has a right to do under the Texas Constitution. And so, like I told Peter last night, if the aim is for political reasons, those prosecutors, Jack Smith, Fannie Willis, Alvin Bragg, Letitia James, every one of them should be prosecuted themselves for deprivation of civil rights, because these prosecutions that are based for political motivations are an absolute attack on the Constitution, the right to the freedom of speech, the freedom of association. You look at the prosecutions that were brought against Trump's associates. Would Steve Bannon ever been prosecuted if he weren't Trump's buddy?
Yeah.
Not a single one of them.
And Manafort?
Paul Manafort.
He spent a lot of time in jail.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Roger Stone. You go right down the list. They are prosecuted only because of their freedom of association.
Yeah.
So they look for a reason to try to find something on because they don't like to be associated with. These prosecutors need to be held, their feet need to be held to the fire. I've advocated what I call rogue prosecutor laws. So in other words, a law will be passed if on the backside it's determined the prosecution is brought primarily for political purposes, then that prosecutor will be subject to prosecution. Yeah. So there's a difference between a political prosecution and a meat and potato prosecution. Someone breaks into your house, that's breaking and entering. That is a meat and potato crime. In other words, that's or steals from you or damages your property or limb. That is a traditional meat and potato type of crime, rather than being prosecuted for what you say, think, or who you associate with. And the problem is and like I told Peter last night, when these prosecutors are involved in these political prosecutions, it takes away from the real criminal prosecutions. And in fact, you all may know, I've defended a couple of J6ers, and I've defended the youngest J6 defendant. How are we doing back there? Doing good? So we're doing good. I'm checking with my manager back there, But
he's a good manager.
I see that. I can tell. But
I've seen him manage before.
You see him manage before?
Yeah.
We're in good hands with all, so, but I was telling Peter last night that in these J6 prosecutions, and I represented, as far as we know, the youngest J6, for 20 years old, Elliot Bichet. All he did was walk in to the Capitol and walk out. And he had every right to do that.
He didn't brandish weapons
Nope. And so
beat people to death.
Yeah. So his dad was calling me and said, and Don, the FBI was talking to my son. Called the FBI, so you're not going to talk to him. So about 3 times I told the FBI to go pound sand. Then I get a call at 6 o'clock in the morning in March of 2021. Don, this is the dad. Listen to this, Dan. I've got 12 FBI counterterrorism agents raiding my house. I'm going, holy smokes, what did the kid not tell me? What did he do? Counterterrorism? So I said, hang on a second. So I throw my jacket on, and this is in Columbia, South Carolina. I'm licensed there, as I mentioned. So I drive from Charlotte down there, and it takes about an hour and a half. I get to the federal courthouse. I go through the federal courthouse. I go to the U.S. attorney. I said, what's going on? He said, well, here's a charge sheet. In the meantime, a couple of these FBI counterterrorism agents said, Mr. Brown, we apologize. We were told we had to do this. So he gives me the charge sheet, 5 misdemeanors. 5 misdemeanors, that's it. And so 12 FBI counterterrorism agents, and they were all trespass variant misdemeanors. And so
the whole time the pipe bomber's just doing whatever he wants to do.
Yeah. So, but you see, in my book, Kangaroo Court, there's a chapter 35, called January 6th v. George Floyd. Look into the prosecutions. 95% of the George Floyd prosecutions were dismissed by Democrat prosecutors. With all those billions of dollars of damage, over 20 deaths that we're aware of, 95% were dismissed. 98% of the J6 prosecutions were pushed to the max.
Yeah.
And at least,
but there was almost $1 million worth of damage done to the Capitol.
Yeah, right, exactly. And of course, all the police officers that were killed by poor Trump people, the only person that died from
Ashley Babbitt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but it's the double standard. So I told Peter, listen, Peter, they're going after average Americans. And if you cited 3 examples here, which it's fair for you to cite that examples for me, but the situation is not the same at all. And right now, Pam Bondi needs to get off the stick. I think you can't let.
She's doing a pretty good job, though, by and large.
She is, but I want to see these prosecutors prosecute the ones I'm telling you about.
They need to move.
But see, the problem is, if they ever take power again, if you don't make them feel the heat now, when they get back in, you think it was bad? It was bad.
It's going to be bad.
If they had stolen the election this time, you and I we'd have to be armed to be in here. I mean, that's how bad it could be. So anyway, I didn't mean to go off.
Well, let me ask you this. This is somewhat related. You probably know the answer to this. Was it Trotsky or Joseph Stalin that said, "Show me the man, and I'll find you the crime"?
Yeah, that was I think it was Trotsky.
Was it Trotsky?
One of the two of those, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's what we're seeing with these kangaroo courts. I mean, you can look in anybody's past, you can prosecute them for something.
You can. You can go find something in the tax code or whatever. But you're right. Show me the man, I'll find the crime. And that's exactly what they've been trying to do. And they don't like Trump because he's effective. He is something like they've never seen. They don't like his personality.
I've never seen anything like him.
No, we've never seen like him in our lifetime.
No.
And right now, by the force of his personality, we're living in a period of relative peace. But they did everything they could to take him down. The first time by impeachment, the second time by bogus political prosecutions, and none of it succeeded.
It's remarkable what we put up with as a people, as a self-governed people.
It is, yeah, sure is.
Do you have any other questions?
Yeah, no, I can't think of anything right now.
Well, I want to ask you about education. We talked about it earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Federal government is getting, hopefully, out of education. Do you believe in competition in the education industry?
Sir. Yes, I do.
So school choice is something we should, at the local level and at the state level, we should be very aware of and let it evolve into the best it can become.
Smaller is better, and a rising tide floats all boats with education. My background is I had 2 of my 3 kids who were homeschooled part of the time. Then I served as on the board and then as chair of a Christian school. And then all my kids finished in a public high school, so I've seen it all. And there's no question. There's I'm trying to look for the word. You can have eduocracy.
Never heard that word.
What I'm talking about is the bureaucracy above the teachers. And first off, I have a friend of mine who is a brilliant teacher. She teaches a foreign language in Charlotte, and she was telling me she'd teach her language and be teaching, and then all of a sudden somebody from the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system, some assistant superintendent of blah, 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 making almost $300,000 a year, walks in the room, tells her how to teach, and then leaves. That money we're paying to these people, first of all, could go to teachers and to other things. But I think we need to do everything we can to encourage competition. It's interesting. I'm an antitrust guy. In other words, big is bad. I believe big is bad, whether it's big government or big corporations. And I give this example sometimes. I don't have my phone with me, but when I was in Chapel Hill 100 years ago, and I'd call home to Plymouth, and I'd talk to my granddaddy and my daddy and my mom, and my daddy would bust my chops because we run up a $50 phone bill, okay? Because you know how it was a long distance. Fast forward 30, 40 years, my son was in the 82nd Airborne in Afghanistan, and I could take my phone and we could do FaceTime, video FaceTime, halfway across the world. What it cost me, not a dime. Why is that? Because Ma Bell got busted up. When Ma Bell, this big monopoly, got busted up, you didn't lose jobs. The jobs were displaced with smaller companies, and there was more competition. And the rising tide floats all boats. And that is the key to superior education. The smaller the classroom size, the smaller the one-on-one, the better. And you've got to get the indoctrination process out of it.
Yeah, 100%.
It's got to go. You got to go basically back to read, write, and arithmetic.
Let them think for themselves.
Well, I mean,
Teach them how to think,
I spoke out,
not what to think.
Spoke out against Common Core and went out on the trail and spoke against it and a little bit about it. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation were in bed with the Department of Education. The Department of Education would come to North Carolina, other states, offer billions of dollars if we would accept this curriculum that had not even yet been written. And there were two working groups for Common Core, one for language arts, one for math. They met in Washington, D.C. The leader of each group was a university professor. The mathematics guy was a guy named Bill Milgram. He had been a mathematics guy that was involved in the Apollo moonshots and taught at Stanford. And the language arts lady was named a professor of English named Sandy Stotsky at the University of Arkansas. Both Stotsky and Milgram resigned from the working group because they found out, number one, on the math side, that what Common Core would have done would have pushed our mathematical scores down. In other words, it would have mandated that the highest you could go in calculus in high school would be pre-calculus. And so you don't get calculus to your college. And some schools have calculus in high school. So it's putting us behind our Asian competitors.
Yes.
And on the language arts side, you wouldn't believe the trash, prurient stuff, sexual stuff, communist stuff. They were taking Dickens out. They were taking Shakespeare out. All the stuff on which our Western civilization is based, and putting prurient trash in there. And so both of those professors resigned from the group. And in most cases, that got shut off. But the Democrats will try something else. But this is an example of top-down education. It's not really education, it's indoctrination. So back to your question, yes, encourage competition through homeschools, through private schools, through Christian schools, through choice. And, you should get a tax credit, in my opinion, if you're going to search for educational opportunities and try to find ways, because the General Assembly here is tasked with the responsibility of educating under our state constitution kids in North Carolina. But it doesn't say, and the public school system is fine. The public school system gets better if it's pushed, like in anything else. So I believe in competition and education.
Speaking of monopolies and government monopolies, besides education, the public education being a government monopoly, and I think we agree on that.
Absolutely.
There's a government monopoly at all levels of government, mostly at state and now the federal government, for medicine.
Right.
For health care.
Absolutely.
And that's going to be a big decision for you to make when you become a senator.
Well, I've already made the decision on how to go with that. You may be aware I was involved in major federal litigation against these jabs that came out. I mean, we may have talked about that a little bit. I
think we did, yes.
Yeah, I got involved in some major federal litigation against the Savannah River nuclear plant in Savannah River, South Carolina. And sued. I had 78 plaintiffs, including mostly nuclear engineers who didn't want to take the jab because Biden was telling the Department of Energy to tell the employer, Savannah River Nuclear Solutions, either force your people to take the jab or cut the federal money. So we sued him, went to the Fourth Circuit, and the Biden finally backed down. We found out that from the discovery in that case, now get this, from the federal government's own numbers, in a 10-month period from January to October 2021, there were more deaths reported, from the 3 COVID jabs, which are under an experimental use authorization, all experimental. In that 10-month period, then, from every other jab combined over 30 years. And the dastardly government kept that away from us. Eisenhower, who I think is the greatest general, you're an Army guy, right?
That's right.
I'm the only oddball in the family. All my sons.
Oh, yes.
But I believe Dwight Eisenhower was the greatest general in the nation's history other than George Washington himself. And Eisenhower, on the night that he left office, spent the last 5 minutes of his farewell speech warning against the military-industrial complex. Now, we have also what I call the governmental pharmaceutical complex.
Yeah.
And the information that I just shared with you should have been made public. They were instead pushing the lies, safe and effective. You take the jab, you won't get the COVID. And then when they got the COVID, like Joe Biden and Lindsey Graham says, I got the COVID, but I'm sure I'm glad I got the jab. Wait a minute, I thought you told me you weren't going to get the COVID. But you see these Jab manufacturers are protected from liability. If something goes wrong, gives them a carte blanche. None of our North Carolina companies are protected. Lowe's is headquartered in Cabarrus County. That's not protected. You got Pepsi Cola. It used to be in Newbert. I don't know if they still are now, but they're not protected. You pick your industry. Why should one industry have protection that's superior to others? See, to me, that's a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. So it is a problem. And when you look at the cost, Obamacare, they call it Affordable Care Act. I call it the Astronomical Cost Act.
It has gone up.
And Roy Cooper's out there saying, we're going to get the cost of health care down. Well, it's its own Obamacare junk that's the reason it is unaffordable. And no middle-class American, we can't afford Blue Cross on our own anymore. And that's another thing. When they passed Obamacare, it was Democrats getting in bed with big insurance. So they help to foster that monopoly. So you got one option in North Carolina, that's Blue Cross. But if you go and you shop your auto insurance, you can look at USAA, you can look at State Farm, you can look at Nationwide, Farm Bureau. You can shop a bunch of different options for auto insurance all across the country, which helps to maintain the cost, but not with medical insurance. And that's got to change. You can't have monopolies.
I have a question. It's a little bit open-ended, so keep it short. Why is it that most Democrat politicians cannot do math?
Because they don't care about doing math. What they care about is power.
Power. That's a great answer.
Right?
That is a
math, nor do they care about the truth. It's the power they care about.
I've estimated your age, and I'm going to ask you a question since you are a local.
I am indeed.
Do you know Danny Robertson from Plymouth?
Very well. I haven't seen him in years. I know his sister Lori. She's a good friend of mine. Danny's a good friend. But I haven't seen him. I love Danny Robertson.
He's my minister.
Get out of town.
Yeah, small world, huh?
You tell Robert Robertson.
I'm going to tell him. He is a great guy. He's the reason I go to that church.
Well, he's a great guy. His sister Lori lives over in Beargrass. She's a teacher over there. So I knew them both.
Have you met his wife, Angie?
Maybe years ago.
She is something else, too. She's another reason I go to that church.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I'd be going to that church if I was...
Well, all the people to go there just salt of the earth. I love it.
Right, yeah. And the whole eastern part of the state, Eastern 95 salt of the earth. Of course, there's a lot of salt of the earth all over the state, but you know how it is.
I know. East and west is usually the best.
You said it. He said it. I love the middle, too. I do.
We love the middle. Everybody loves it in the middle.
And we won't argue the barbecue.
It's warm and calm in the middle.
Yes.
We've had a great time.
Thank you.
Don, thank you for coming down here for Table Talk. Thank you, Down East Dave.
Yes, appreciate it. Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Intellectual questions.
Both, man.
Yes, sir.
Surrounded by intellectual podcasts on both sides.
Let's vote for this guy.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
God bless you.